I will start right now. Oops, and a lot of noise. Okay, then this is a first presentation. I have two presentations regarding the theory and some thoughts about how to prepare or how to organize the Git repositories and how to start working properly. Why this decision? Because from our experience, and we started with more practical things, and at the end we realized that it's better to establish a very good Git workflow, and then after you let's say get used to how interact with Git, you can start with the CICD fundamentals and start including the tools and start using the tools. So I will have a look right now. I would let's say a few words of our experience. At the end, the conclusion is that you can use any Git workflow that you are used to, but use one, I mean, and use properly. And the other conclusion is that you need to forget about the tools and start working on the workflows. Why? Because probably the tools can change. In the next webinar, I would show you how to use GitHub and Travis and other open source tools. But internally, for instance, here at Atos, what we are using for the private projects is Jenkins or Nexus or other tools. But the workflow remains the same. That's why for us to use open source projects or to use private projects is the same. It's just a question of how to configure your project and how to do it in the better way. Okay. So I will start with some ideas on the Git workflow fundamentals. There are a lot of Git workflows out there. You can have a look at them. The most commonly used and what we are let's say suggesting is the GitFlow workflow. The GitFlow workflow has the idea in that you need to have a master branch, or in our case, a release branch. We renamed a bit the nomenclature because at the end we prefer on the GitHub repositories to have as the develop branch the master branch. Okay, so at the end, people, when you are receiving some pull request, are used to merge the features into the master branch and not in the develop branch. But again, it's a question of tastes. If you want to follow the strict GitFlow workflow suggests the use of a branch develop and a branch master. We improve this part in order to use master branch as develop and release branch as the releasable streamline. What this means is that the master is always clean. As you can see, there is the version in here, another version here, and another version here. But the the master branch, in our case the release branch, is always clean. You always can release and can you always can deploy the versions into your deployment infrastructure, Google Cloud or wherever you are using. Develop is continuously enriched with new features, but also bug fixes, okay? And bug fixes is another tricky part because you need to also merge with the release branch. And then when a new feature is agreed, the idea is that you include an issue, you inform the issue, and then the developers need to create a new branch always from develop. This is something important from develop, or in our case master, and then you start pushing, and then you merge back to develop the functionality. And as I mentioned, in the next webinar next week, I will show you a practical use case. Okay, you will see that this is something you can do it more or less quickly. And actually, the recommendations are to try to split the features into daily work, let's say. Martin Fowler said that the recommended timeline for a feature should be a daily work. So you need to pull all the changes in develop, start developing, and then integrate back in the same day the new feature. Of course, this is the ideal world. This is for us is like a couple of days, 3 days, 4 days. But at the end, this means that when you merge changes in a daily way, the possibilities of conflicts or the probability of conflicts are reduced. This is more or less the idea, because if this feature is going to be merged there, probably there will be conflicts. But as you know, this is not always ideal. So it's a question of let's say testing and again retrospectives and plannings and so on. So there is another. Okay, this image is quite. I cannot see very good the idea, the image. But at the end, there is another workflow, which is the GitHub workflow. It's well spread use, and there are a lot of people using this out there. So there is here a link. Again, the idea of GitHub is to avoid this kind of develop master or master release changes, to focus on only one streamline. And then all the modifications are going through this streamline version. For instance, in our case, this would be the release branch, and then you are doing the features functionalities directly from the release branch. And there is also another possibility. I showed you the three more used, let's say. But the idea is that you can use mixes. What the people are doing is mixing the three workflows, or doing for a project one workflow, and for other project another workflow, and this is more or less the idea. And as you can see, in the GitLab workflow, there is a master branch in which you are deploying things to the pre-production branch and production branch. The idea is, again, we rename this as a release, but GitLab proposed to work directly over master. Well, this is an option for well-experimented developers, but it's not our recommendation. If you are not even a very JIT or experimented JIT users, sometimes it's tricky to resolve conflicts, and well, I would start with let's say more complex workflows, but secure. Because the idea of this is that it's a simpler workflow, but you can commit errors. So our proposal, as I mentioned, is to use the GitFlow workflow, but plus pull requests. The idea is that, as you can see here in the link, Atlassian, which is the company who designed the guys who designed the GitFlow workflow came from Atlassian, and they recommended the use of Git push. And we slightly changed this part, including here the pull request. And as I mentioned, we will provide a practical use case next week, okay, using templates and so on. And at the end, how to handle the pull request is okay. You download all the modifications from develop. This is here we are assuming that we are in the develop branch or master branch. Then you download all the modifications, create a new branch. One of the interesting things, and one of our things we learned in the past is that it's advisable to use simple naming, because at the beginning we started to use only the issue number, but we realized that sometimes during the daily meetings or weekly meetings, it was not easy to follow what the issue is about. And then we decided to include some short description. So just having a look at the feature in the Git repository, we can know what this functionality is about, and not that if you here only have the issue number, this XX are the issue number for the feature you are implementing. You need to go to the issue in the GitHub repository, have a look at the issue description, and so on. It's a question of facilitating things. Then you start commit, push to the feature functionality remotely, and then use the graphical user interface to include the pull request using the templates. As I mentioned, this is part of next webinar that I wanted you to be prepared, and there are some things it's thought as a hands-on, so you can play around of the repository, the test repository we have in our organization. So finally, some of the recommendations is that in the pull request, it's quite important to clearly describe how the feature was implemented. It's not a question of, okay, the administrator of the repository, I know the administrator of the repository, so I would I will send a merge request, a pull request without informing anything. No. This should be, this is important, because if someone is joining the project, you can have a look at all the pull requests, and then you can have a look. You have an idea of what the history of the Git repository, which is important, and the login also can extract important things from these pull request templates. Again, use templates to guide you in the process. At the beginning is cumbersome to fill in every thing in the template, but when you are you get used to use it, is very enlightening because you can see everything defined, everything described for the newcomers. Okay. Another important recommendation is that you need to group the commits by functionality. This is quite important when you are contributing to open source projects, okay? Because at the end, when you send a pull request to some open source project, if you are not grouping the commits by functionality, things can break, and then they can accept some commits, but not other commits. So it's important to have the consistent of group the commits. And another important thing, for instance, is try not to refactor while you are implementing the functionality. I mean, try not to refactor current files, because then it's like a nightmare to follow what the functionality is about. Okay, and then remember to close the issue, because when one of the functionalities we're including is the automatic generation of the changelog, which is again a matter of hours to include the changelog, and then we are generating the changelog automatically, and for that it's important to close the issue inside the pull request. I will show you next week in any case. And another crucial thing that we learned during our, let's say, roadmap or during our journey to the CICD is the code review. Code review is very important in the open source projects. Okay, at the end, when you are reviewing the code of another colleague, you are learning. That's the baseline. You are learning how to do things, how people are doing things, how the feature is implemented. But actually, the other guy is learning from you, because you are providing suggestions, providing recommendations, and guiding more or less the implementation. This is good for the new guys, and I guess that is better for the experimented developers, because at the end, you think that, for instance, know a lot of Java, but with years you start, let's say, doing things wrongly, and then the new guys are saying to you, no, please, I need to know better the code. I need to have a very, very, very ground roots on what you are doing in the project. So please try to implement things correctly. It's quite important also to use quality assurance tools such as SonarQube, SonarCloud, Lint, and so on. And actually, this is something more psychological than actually practical. When you know that your code will be reviewed, automatically write cleaner code. This is something I experimented a lot. If I'm saying people, okay, I will review your code, at the end, the code is much, much better than expected. But if you are, well, not focusing on this, my colleague, for instance, I'm thinking my colleague is a very experimented developer. Okay, I know, I realize, I'm totally sure that he or she will implement things perfectly. And at the end, when you check the source code, is not cleaner than, for instance, if a new guy are receiving recommendation about including the new functionality. And of course, the last recommendation is learn, learn, and learn. This is something I experimented a lot, and I learn every day from people implementing things, because there are a lot of ways to improve the source code and to improve things in the project. Okay, this is the last slide about the GitFlow part. I don't know if you want to ask questions or if you prefer to wait until the end of the second presentation.
Thank you, Carlos, for the presentation. We don't have any question, as you said, right now. It is all clear currently. And next week, with your example presentation, it will be more clear for us.
Yeah, it's actually the presentation of the next week will be okay. I will show you the tools and how to configure the tools, but it's like let's say material to have a look, and then I will show you how you include a new functionality into an example project.
Okay.
Okay. Then I will go to the next presentation, which is the next step. Actually, a recommendation when people ask me, I want to include CICD in my project. The first thing I recommend is start with a Git workflow, and that's why I started with the GitFlow workflow, because if you start from the beginning, you need to get used how Git works, how to avoid conflicts, how to include new functionalities, and then you are prepared for the next step, that is the CI/CD workflow. Okay, and then just as a rule of thumb, as I mentioned, is not focus on the tools. I mean, for instance, Jenkins has a lot of plugins, and at the beginning we used a lot of plugins from Jenkins, but then we realized that when we want to export the project to GitHub and use Travis, for instance, we stick to the Jenkins tool. And then we need to reshape things because we cannot use Travis. Then we need to use Jenkins, but in GitHub, you know, it's a kind of complexity that you can avoid if you adapt the tools to your workflow. So use the tools wisely. And one of the things it's quite important, and I will show you in the next week, is that it's quite important to use a build management tool. So build management tool allows you to separate things from the CI/CD tool. For instance, you can use Maven, you can use Gradle, you can use in the JavaScript world Grunt or Gulp. At the end, you need to use somehow a tool, a build management tool, to guide you in the process of the CI/CD, and then it's easy to use the tools for this very well established project. Okay, so just to put you in context, everything starts from the continuous integration, and the continuous integration it's a software development cycle in which you start planning, developing, building, and testing your source code. The idea behind this is that the source code is testable, including test. You can also use some agile methodologies or TDD methods. I always recommend the use of some agile methodologies. At the end, it's up to you what to use it, but it's quite important. What we are suggesting usually is the use of some Scrum things, also Kanban things, also test-driven development things, but not to stick to a methodology, because at the end it's better to adapt again the methodologies to your team than not the other way around. Because if you want to use the Scrum method framework, it's quite complicated. You can use the power of the daily meetings, Scrum recommends, or the retrospective, which is quite important meetings and also planning. But for instance, in the day-to-day, we prefer the Kanban because it's, let's say, less restrictive. Kanban allows you to not to include the specific sprints and so on. So we are open to this, but I recommend to use some methodology, wherever you want, wherever you get used to, and wherever it works for your team. Okay. If you go a step further, you are providing continuous delivery. Okay. Everything is tested. When the source code is developed and built and tested, then you can release the code. And the release is a process of freezing the functionalities. So you are saying, okay, this is working, and it's called version 0.1.0.0. And at any moment, you can go back to this version, and the artifacts should be somewhere, and the Git repository should be frozen in a tag, for instance, or in a version. And it's up to you if you can go to the next step automatically because there are tools, or as we learned that at the end, the deployment process could be automatically, but the production process should be manual. I mean, someone should say, okay, let's go for the 1.0.0 version, and inform everyone in the project and so on. So what we are doing is prepare things for continuous delivery. It's what we are showing next week, and then it's up to you how to deploy it. You could deploy it also automatically because the artifact is there. What we are doing right now in our internal, let's say in our deployment infrastructure, is that we deploy automatically the new features. I mean, it's for development for us internally to see how it's working for the integration tests and so on. But for the production deployment should be somehow not manually, but yes, with a button, let's say. And it's not. This does not mean that you need to copy everything and deploy things. It's about of manual interaction, or giving access, or giving permission, or receiving permission from the user or the owner or something like that. But I will show you this next week, okay? How we are doing the process. Here, it's not included the quality assurance. That's quite important, but I will show you how to do it. Okay, again, adapt the tools to your workflow. What we are using, or what we are planning to use in Fair for Health, okay? As it's supposed to have public projects, open source projects. We recommend the use of GitHub for sure. This is something you are get used and you are using a lot. And for the, let's say, this agile process of checking what we are doing and the features and the meetings, and to most importantly, to have effective meetings, what we are using is something we like a lot, which is the Kanban board. The Kanban board is a way in which you put the issues and you move the issues in ongoing, to do, prioritize things, and so on. And then once you select an issue in the board as ongoing. You create a new feature, start implementing the feature, and then send the pull request to master. Okay. Then Travis starts acting because it's an automation server which do all the process of building, testing, quality assurance, and so on. And once everything is validated, when the merge is done, the artifacts are uploaded to Nexus. The quality assurance in Sonar Cloud is done, and actually a Docker image is uploaded to the Docker Hub. Again, everything is going back to the GitHub because it's integrated into the master branch. Okay, this is the process of integrating new things. Okay, as you can see, everything is more or less closed, and once you are get used the workflow, you cannot go back to how you were working in the past. It's something I learned. Once you teach people to use these new tools, they realize how I work in the past. I cannot work like I did it in the past. Okay. And then we are moving to the next steps, which is continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is something I recommend that even it's an automatic process, it should be done by an administrator, someone who is taking decisions, joining or receiving feedback from the users, receiving feedback from the stakeholders, and so on. It should be an administrator. The continuous integration part is mixed, developers and administrators or maintainers, but the continuous delivery part is an administrator task. And why it's an administrator task? Because once functionality is integrated into master, you need to generate a new version. And a new version is something that should be decided by a lot of people in the project, developers, non-developers, stakeholders, users, clinicians, and so on. So it's something we need to agree between us, and then some guy generate a new release. Then we slightly changed this. I will show you next week. But as I mentioned, the release branch is always clean. It's always deployable. And the process is the administrator integrate things from master to release, and then there is a Travis trigger that provide all this functionality. Prepare the release, remove the snapshot, or let's say the test level that includes this recommended by Maven, tag the release in GitHub, generate the changelog, increment the version following Semver standard, which is like for patches, minor or major changes. And finally, upload the final artifacts into Docker Hub and into the artifact repository. Okay, then the version is incremented, and then it's going merge back to master branch. As I mentioned, I will show you this next week, and you could see how this is working. Okay, and okay, this is everything. I don't know if there are questions, or probably you will have in the next week. Just only mention that I uploaded the material for the next webinar. Even I will resend you again. It is important that you play with that you have a look at what we are seeing. Even if you want to configure some tools, it's okay. You can do it. They are open source. You can test it with different projects. And finally, even the project I will show next week is a Java project. We also have examples with Angular projects or non-Java projects. Okay, so you can use, for instance, SRTC. I know that they are using Electron projects, but we can adapt this to Electron or to Angular, because at the end there are plugins that provide the same functionalities that than Maven and Gradle. Okay. And if you have questions, please go ahead. And if not, next week, I guess that you will have in the next webinar. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Carlos, for the presentation. It was very useful and clear. Luckily, we are used to all these tools. We have been using them in our projects, so it will not be hard for us to act as you presented in your presentation.
Perfect. Yeah, I know that actually you you open source the Don't Fire project, so it's I guess that you have experience on this. And I don't remember in the first webinar. I don't know if it was Matthias or Franz who recommended some Maven plugin to list the third-party licenses in some project. I don't know if it was Matthias or Franz. I don't remember, or Malte maybe. Okay, just for to mention that it's included in the repo. Okay, right now what we are doing is it's not the process of CICD, but it's an important process for the people checking that we are complying with the licenses. So we included the Maven plugin, and actually it is generating a report with all the third-party libraries you are using with the corresponding open source licenses. So this was a very nice result from the first webinar. So I will check the email and who was the person recommending the use of this plugin. Actually, I will show you next week, okay? Just during the practical use case. Okay, any further question?
No, not from our side.
Okay, so thank you very much, Celia. Well, right now I will stop the recording, and Celia, I will. Oops.